Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Roker Report podcast in association with Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. It's Phil hosting this weekend after Sunderland won another home game, albeit in hard-fought fashion against Reading to continue their good form in the Championship. It was not the most eventful game in terms of aesthetics, it wasn't the most attractive game to watch, but there was a lot to talk about. And to do this I'm joined by Chris Wynn. How are you this evening, Chris?
I'm alright, Phil. I'm looking forward to talking through an absolute slog of a match.
It was a slog, and we'll come on to that in a few moments. But obviously, just before the game, we'd obviously come off the back of two, intense games. We had the trip to Millwall in the Championship last weekend, and we also had the FA Cup midweek game against Fulham. And before the game, I don't know about you, Chris, but I was just a little bit edgy about this one because I just wondered whether this might have been one of those games. It's a game too far. Players have emptied the tank during the midweek game, and they're obviously being worked over by Millwall. Were you fairly confident heading into the game that we could do the business yesterday?
You know what it is? If you listen to the pod, me and Gav in midweek, you'll have heard us just talk again. So it was we talked about with the Swansea game earlier in the season, I think it was the Cardiff game earlier in the season. There was a few others as well, I think, where we've played teams where they've been on a really bad run. And we've just been saying they're there for the taking. There's 3 points there on offer for us. And we said it in midweek about Reading as well. We were like, it's there. Like the 3 points, we know we can beat them. And I mean, like most sides in the division, but in terms of Reading's form, they hadn't won away for God knows how long. I think you had to go back to November or October or something like that for Reading's last away win. And again, we just knew it was there for the taking. But we said, me and Gav were like, these things don't always go to plan, like the Cardiff game, like the Swansea game. It's not as easy as you think on the day where you look on paper and you just think it's going to be a simple game. So I think we knew we weren't going to kind of steamroller them. I get what you're saying about what led up to that game in terms of the effort for the Fulham game. The Millwall game, as you said, was tough. Absolutely right. There's the physical element of it, and I think Tony Mowbray touched on that. We might come back to it. But, I mean, from my point of view, it's the mental side of things. So you can almost say there's mental fatigue there, almost. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, yes, I thought we would get 3 points, but I didn't think it was going to be a walkover.
Let's dive straight into the game. Now, obviously, Reading brought their team up, and to go through the Reading team yesterday was kind of to look back at maybe the Premier League maybe 10, 11 years ago, because obviously they had the likes of Junior Hoylett in there, they had Jeff Hendrick, they had Shane Long and Andy Carroll up front. Reading basically came to spoil the game, to slow it down, use delaying tactics pretty much right from the get-go. And obviously the first half from a Sunderland point of view, there was no lack of effort and there was no lack of ambition, but one or two passes were going astray. It wasn't quite clicking for us in an attacking sense, and it became obvious that, patience was going to be the order of the day. Did Reading's approach surprise you, given, as you mentioned, obviously they weren't in great form coming into the game, and I think a lot of people might have expected them to do that, but did you expect them to be so kind of, brazen in terms of the defence that they put up from the get-go yesterday?
Absolutely, 100%. Me and Gav touched on it in midweek. I think the Alex Ray effect had something to do with it. Because I think, Paul Ince isn't daft. He'll have said, Alex Ray, you've played probably, 100 games or something at the stadium, right? Or however many you played. What's this crowd like? What do we have to do? What's going to be the secret to kind of getting under their skin? And that's how they set up, and they kind of did. And I've heard a lot of Reading are kind of the worst side to kind of come to the stadium light in terms of how they set up.
Yeah,
you could look at it the other way. You could almost argue saying, well, we didn't get a sniff.
Yeah,
and we didn't really look like scoring because of the way they set up and frustrated us. I've got no problem at all with sides setting up like that. It's a game plan. Reading are in trouble. They're on a bad run. They've set up in a way to get something out of the game, to stay in the game, and then later on, maybe be a bit more expansive and nick 1 and nick 3 points. I mean, Paul Ince has been there and done it. It's all well and good. We can't moan about these teams doing these things. I mean, they've got every right to do it. And in their position, they need points, they need results, they need some confidence, and they're going to try and get that any way they can. So I've got no problem with that. The onus is on us to do something, and we've got to do our thing at that point. We didn't do it first half. And we've said many times we've got this young squad. You could almost say they've been through quite a lot over the last couple of weeks with those 2 ties with Fulham, and I don't think having a replay actually helped us. But in that first half, the tempo wasn't there. Like I said, I think it was a mental problem because of the change in the second half that you saw. that
Yeah.
it didn't sit like if it was physical, then I think it's more difficult to step it up like we did in the second half, and that's why I've got a feeling it was mental because Mowbray got them in at half time, and you could see he told them that the game wasn't going to come to them.
Yeah.
That we're not just going to play, and then suddenly we'll get a goal out of nothing just because we've got 65% of possession. We've got to break them down. Reading is saying, well, come on, then break us down. And in the second, I think Mowbray kind of picked them up and said mentally, you've got to go out and win this game. It's not going to come to you. So we'll come on to it with the substitutions. But I think even at half time, he earned a bit of his coin this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Is that, we've seen these players this season. They've solved puzzles on the pitch for themselves. There's been times when we've blown teams away with expansive attacking football, when it's all come easy, and there's been other times, a lot of times at home, when teams have come in and they've frustrated us, and we've kind of had to try and solve those problems for ourselves. And I think you're right, Chris. I think the first half yesterday was a classic example of, okay, we know we've got the quality here, but how can we get through them? How can we make it happen for ourselves? And how can we break them down? And, maybe it was just one of those games where, you do have to take your time. You have to be patient. I mean, I think the crowd yesterday really helped them. I didn't get any sense of frustration from the supporters. I felt that there was, that they were patient. They could see what Reading were doing. I mean, they did an excellent job of thwarting us and kind of neutralising our attacking threats in that first half. And obviously, we didn't have Ross Stewart, and there were times when someone like Dan Ballard would get on the ball and he was shaping up to play a long ball into where Stewart would be, but he kind of stopped himself because he knew that he only had Joe Gelhardt to hit, and that tactic's not going to work in that situation. So,
here's one for you, Phil, because I'm interested to see what you think of this one, because you mentioned Ross Stewart and missing Ross Stewart,
yeah,
and you mentioned Gelhardt coming in, and you mentioned that kind of Dan Ballard almost second guessing himself, thinking I'm not going to play that ball because no, that's the ball that Ross Stewart would be expecting, not what Gelhardt would be expecting. But I mean, I thought Gelhardt's movement looked fantastic. I think he's very clever in what he does.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to take time for them to know what runs he makes, because he makes very different runs to Ross Stewart.
Yeah.
But with the way he plays, because he looks like he's on the last shoulder, he wants to get him behind. I mean, do you think we need to change our play a little bit to get the ball forward a bit quicker with Gelhardt up front than Ross Stewart?
I think we do, and I think this is where Alex Pritchard could really play a key role, because we know that Pritchard's good at playing those little slide rule passes, into the front man, and he can unlock a defence. And I think those are the kind of balls that Gelhardt's going to thrive off. I think he's going to be the kind of guy who really thrives with the ball into feet if he can just find a gap and dart through it, and we can slide a pass into him. But I think the speed of play from the transition is going to be absolutely crucial, Chris. I think that's a very good point that you've just raised there. He looks. I'm sure that Gelhardt will be, a nippy, lively forward. A player who kind of buzzes around, and can kind of find gaps and dart through them. But he's going to need the service, and I think, I do agree with you that we are going to have to adapt. We knew we were going to have to adapt when we lost Ross Stewart. I think, me and Gav talked about this on a previous pod. We knew we were going to have to modify our style of play in order to get goals from elsewhere. I think that was inevitable. And I think with Gelhardt, I think we are going to have to keep it on the deck a little bit more. And I think it's where the likes of Dan Neil and Edouard Michou, who we'll come on to later, they're going to be key as well, because they're getting really confident now. They're playing with their heads up. They're looking to carry the ball. So, yeah, I think in some ways, I think that it's been a bit of a false start for Gelhardt in some respects, because obviously he made his debut in a very hostile environment against Millwall. It was decent, but it wasn't anything special. That's okay. He's obviously cup tied for midweek, and then he comes in against an obstinate and resolute Reading team. So not easy for him. But yeah, I think we'll get the best out of him, through good service, through quick balls into him, and he can make the rest happen himself. So yeah, I'm optimistic about him, Chris. I think he will thrive. I think he might take a bit of time, but how many of these players have taken a bit of time to really settle into our style of play?
Oh, yeah.
And really kind of get attuned to the way, Mowbray wants them to play. And Gelhardt might be the same.
I was just going to say, so you're especially right, but especially when there's only one striker.
Yes.
And that you've almost got to adapt to that. You've got to play to that one striker's strengths. And it's almost the whole team's got to... I mean, Gelhardt's obviously going to adapt a little bit to, where his positioning is when Ahmad and Roberts are doing their thing on the right hand side. What does he do? Does Clark pull the ball back? Does Clark knock the? I mean, actually, as a striker, he's probably got to get used to Clark cutting back and then trying to take him back on again. And it's that expectation of the ball coming in. But it is. I mean, you're right. It is going to take probably 3, 4, 5 games for Gelhardt and the others to kind of get used to playing each other, because with Gelhardt being that focal point, they've got to kind of give and take with each other to kind of play to each other's strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first half was quite frustrating, but I want to highlight the performances of Paddy Roberts and Trai Hume in particular, and also Dan Ballard. Now, we know that Roberts has got quality. We know he was, a high-profile signing when he joined the club. Obviously, he joined on what was ostensibly, I think, a free transfer or something close to that. And he's really starting to shine now, and obviously Hume was a slow burner as well. And I just felt that the effort that those two lads continued to show in the first half, even if it wasn't quite clicking for them, was really impressive. They kept on going. They kept on trying to make things happen. What have you made of their kind of gradual improvement as the season has gone on, particularly in Trai Hume's case, who really got his chance when the Nguch was injured? And he's come in and he's taken that chance and he's really grown into that role. So, again, another example really of Mowbray managing a player and increasing his game time and being rewarded for that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked a lot about Hume when his form just kind of just went skyrocketed. And because when he first came in, he did look nervous, and he's a young lad, and I think and we've talked again, on previous pods about this atmosphere we've got at the minute where players are kind of waiting for their chance, and as soon as somebody gets suspended or someone takes a knock, they step up, and Hume was the same, but Hume was a little bit fortunate at the beginning in the fact that the way I think the injuries happened, I think with Gooch's injury at the time, Hume got those 2 or 3 games to kind of get going and get some momentum because he did start, he was playing it simple, he didn't want to get out of position, he made sure of things, and gradually, as you've said, he kind of just got better and better and better because, like you said, he was almost standing taller with every game. That he was just getting better with confidence, and the way he was playing, he was getting better with each game. He's a shoe-in for that right back position now, and he's made it his own, which is, I mean, for a lad his age, and I just love his commitment. I love the fact that when a winger's got the ball, he wants to smash them. He wants to get into them. He doesn't stand up. He doesn't stand off. He's not scared. I mean, we can go back to the James McLean.
That's the one I was going to say.
Yeah. Just because it's so much fun. But that's the one that kind of sticks out. But yeah, I mean, Hume's fantastic, and we'll probably come on to Roberts more on the goal, because I think a lot needs to be said about Paddy Roberts.
Absolutely. So we get in at half time. It's 0-0. Obviously, it's a little bit frustrating because we can see what Reading are doing, but the game's still there, everyone. We know we've got another half to come, and we come out second half, and obviously Mowbray didn't make the changes immediately, but I think there was a sense that they were definitely going to come, sooner rather than later. And obviously, eventually, he brought on Alex Pritchard. He also brought on Luke O'Nien. And I think they definitely sparked things into life. I felt that, it was the kind of game that Pritchard was going to thrive in because we know he's good in tight spaces. And we know that Luke O'Nien would really give us, some drive and some kind of go forward. And it obviously worked because we started to fashion out some really good chances in the second half. Obviously, there was a ball when it was an unorthodox tactic for Adji Elise to find himself up front, but there was a ball played over the top, which he controlled really well, and just couldn't get it under control, and it obviously went over the bar. And there was also a volley from Edouard Michou that if he maybe let it drop a fraction further, it might have got in. He caught it really sweetly. So the second half, Chris, was definitely, as you said, we definitely found that spark. We definitely found that impetus. And, Reading seemed to kind of dig in even further, didn't they? Reading seemed to kind of, they were killing on for dear life as we really started to put the squeeze on them. So do you feel that Mowbray got those first couple of substitutions right in terms of the timing of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, and I completely kind of disagreed with him waiting so long in the game, but he got it bang on. Because actually, what I think he did, which I think was a little bit of genius, was because I think the changes, I think we knew at half time, we kind of something has to give. We have to change something. We have to, we have to increase the tempo. We have to, make a change tactically or make a change with the personnel. But he waited for Reading to have 20 more minutes of defending and chasing the ball and being a bit more knackered.
Yeah.
Pritchard came on 65, and then he waited another 10 minutes for O'Nien and Lihaji. Mowbray played a blinder. I mean, I'll hold my hands up saying I was, watching it thinking, why hasn't he made a change yet? He needs to make a change. Something needs to change. Yeah. And I think he timed it right, and I'll hold my hands up saying, he clearly knows what he's doing, and I haven't got a clue.
So we'll come on to the goal then, which eventually came through Paddy Roberts. I think it was his dogged determination to get the goal and keep it alive, and then the composure and the calmness under pressure. So he obviously won the ball back, just on the edge of the Reading box. I think it was. He sat the defender down, And then he did what Ahmad did against Middlesbrough, and he just kind of whipped it near post, I think, and the keeper had no chance. And it was a really composed finish. And I think it was just rewards for Roberts' performance, because as we said earlier, he was persistent, he never gave up, he was always looking to make things happen. And, as we said, we know that Roberts has got the quality, but we also know that, as we mentioned earlier, in Ross Stewart's absence, we are going to have to spread the goal-scoring burden around the team if possible. We are going to have to, be reliant on the likes of Roberts and Clark, Ahmad as well, to obviously chip in with goals. So are you confident, Chris, that someone like Roberts has got the quality to deliver those goals and to really kind of, nobody's going to replace Ross Stewart. We know that. We know that Stewart is a unique striker, and we know how key he is to our style of play. But now that we are going to have to adapt, Roberts could come into his own, do you think?
Just in terms of pure quality, you almost sometimes have to ask yourself, how did Paddy Roberts end up playing for Sunderland?
Yes.
How sometimes you watch these players. I mean, Ahmad's obviously in a different position, coming on loan from Man United, kind of getting some game time, young lad. But Paddy Roberts, I mean, he's a Premier League player. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And I know you could tell kind of where his career was when he first joined us, because it took him almost, it's ridiculous to say that it took him, a good 2 months to get into his stride in League One. So it almost shows you where he was at. But what, a year later, or not even a year later, just look where he is now. He's just an incredible player, and it's fantastic to have someone like that in a Sunderland shirt in the first team. And where could he go? Talking about goals, and I think Clark's got 2 recently. He's got one in the 2 Fulham games, one each in both of those. Roberts has scored. Ahmad's slightly gone off the boil a little bit last couple of games.
Yeah, I felt that as well.
Yeah.
The interesting thing for me, though, Chris, was yesterday is that even when he was substituted, he obviously walked off the pitch on the far side, and he ended up walking around the perimeter to come back to the dugout. And I was sitting on the other side of the stadium, and what really caught my eye was the fact that every single person applauded him when they were on their feet, giving him appreciation as he walked back to the dugout. And I think that just shows just how much the fans have really taken Ahmad to their hearts. Yeah. That even if he's not quite on it, we know he's capable of producing magic, and yesterday wasn't quite his game. But even if he's not quite on it, the fans are appreciative of his efforts, and I think that's really refreshing, isn't it? It's really good to see the fans backing these lads, even if it's not quite happening for them in a particular game.
Yeah, it is absolutely, and that's the thing with those 3. Nobody, you talk to anybody, nobody's going to doubt that Clark, Ahmad, and Roberts have probably all got the quality on their day to be Premier League players.
Yeah,
they're playing for Sunderland at the moment because they're all capable of having off days.
Yeah,
and that's why they're playing for Sunderland at the moment. Take them on their best day, they are Premier League players. That's exactly what you've just said there about they've got grace because we know they're so good. So like I say, I think Ahmad's been off the boil last couple of games, but all we're doing is waiting for him to kick back in again because we know how good he is. And it's the same with Roberts. Roberts has had periods this season where he's kind of just gone off the boil, and he's had a couple of games, even dropped to the bench. Clark had a couple of games where he was needing to be taken out, given a couple of games on the bench. And it's good to see them getting frustrated by that. And Ahmad was clearly frustrated in the early part of the season. And when they've come back and getting their chance, they've all taken it. But you're right, and it seems like with Clark over the last week getting a couple of goals, Roberts scoring at the weekend, it seems like they are stepping up and they're having a pop and they're getting into those positions, which is the best thing. As long as, and I always remember Peter Reid talking about this when we were in a bad patch, that as long as you're creating chances, as long as you look like like you're in the final third and you're being positive, eventually they're going to come. The goals will come. So as long as Clark, Ahmad, Roberts getting the ball in the box, getting dangerous positions, pulling the trigger, because I think that's the important thing with those 3. Sometimes they like to entertain, they like doing the difficult thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want them to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this on Middlesbrough podcast we did after that game, and I think it might have been yourself who said that there were times when Ahmad and Paddy Roberts were just slightly overcomplicating things a little bit, maybe getting too bogged down in that interplay, which we know they're so good at, rather than just kind of keeping it a little bit more simple and being a little bit more direct. But on the other hand, Chris, these lads are playing with such freedom at this moment in time and such, joy. They're enjoying their football. So you don't want to stifle that, do you? You don't want Tony Mowbray to kind of turn around and say, look, lads, you must do this, you must do that. I think they are given license to perform within a certain system. And that's surely a good thing going forward, isn't it?
Just imagine that. That's a tough conversation to have, isn't it? with,
It is,
with
yeah.
Patrick Roberts.
Yeah.
Patrick Roberts and Ahmad, you've got two fantastic players who at
Yeah.
times are literally taking the piss out of the opposition at times.
Yeah.
And then you're almost kind of my assumption is, and it's funny going back to that Luke O'Nien commentary thing when he did it with the first 20 minutes on Sky.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting to hear what he said, where he hinted that Tony Mowbray just leaves the attacking players to just, I'm not going to worry about you. You just do your thing.
Yeah.
And I'll concentrate on what's behind you, put the structure in behind you, and you do your thing. So, and I know we're kind of saying that a word in their ear just to, can you just pull the trigger, a little bit early or get the ball in a bit quicker. I fully expect that Mowbray won't say anything at all to them and just say, just and they'll work it out. But yeah, I can imagine that if he does go down that route, it's an awkward conversation. So I imagine he just leaves it be.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think he's empowered them to such a degree that he just trusts them. It's like, right, okay, we might have a moment of frustration with Patrick and with Ahmad, but we know that they're capable of producing that moment of magic that can turn a game. And I think it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's you take the frustration and you take the odd moment where they're, wish you could do this, wish you could do that, for the moment where he can leave you wide, open mouthed with shock at what he's just done. So yeah, it is.
Well, wouldn't you?
Absolutely,
you would.
Yeah.
Players like that, you just say, go and do your thing.
Yeah.
And you tell everyone else, look, we've got these three players. Give them the ball in the final third, and get into position. Or either get out their way or get in position, and that's it. Because you would 3 players like that at this level, you just tell them to do their thing. But we need it. But it's the end product. It's fine. It's fantastic what they do. But it's emphasising that when they do it, there needs to be an end product.
Yeah, so obviously we managed the final stages of the game quite well yesterday. Obviously, Reading really kind of were a bit of a sorry rabble by the end, and I think it was epitomised by Andy Carroll's performance. A man who, it never ceases to amaze me that Liverpool paid $8 million more for him than they paid for Luis Suarez in 2011. That's one of my favourite football stats of all time. And it was a fairly limp, lifeless performance from him yesterday, and obviously Sunderland were able to see the game out. Crucial 3 points to take us back to the fringes of the playoffs. And obviously Paul Ince, Reading's boss, had a bit of a, let's be polite and let's call it a bit of a rant yesterday after the game with our North East sports reporting legend Jeff Brown, who criticised or questioned Reading's style of play and their approach to the game. But as you said at the top of the show, Chris, obviously, Ince has got a right to set the team up how he sees fit. So do you think that was just him obviously maybe being a little bit of frustrations kicked in? Obviously they only lost by 1 goal. They'd done a fairly good job of thwarting us up until that point. So was it just a classic case of a manager, a little bit frustrated after the game?
Well, let's just start with Jeff Brown. I mean, Jeff Brown was a young reporter, travelling on the coach under Dennis Smith.
Yes.
So that would not have fazed Jeff Brown at all. He'd have come through an apprenticeship as a journalist with covering Dennis Smith as a manager. He'll have seen tougher than Paul Ince. But Paul Ince, it was all PR for Paul Ince, because he's got to justify those tactics to his fans, and I think the way he did it was to deny all knowledge, which was a little bit strange. But yeah, I mean, it's management speak. It's all fluff. But I mean, just on Reading, the context it puts what we're doing into focus. Because if you look at Carroll, you look at Long, Long and Carroll up front. This, to me, is a perfect example of why the club didn't get another body in January.
Yeah.
That because you could end up with people like that who'd start. If you get an Andy Carroll in because you need another body, you change the way your whole focus and philosophy of the team just purely because you've got an extra body in the team.
Yeah.
Because they play, if you get Connor Wickham was mentioned, and I don't know whether people were serious with that, but I saw his name being banded around. But I mean, then you play to his strengths. We've got a philosophy in the way we play. You don't bring we need a body, so we'll bring a 35-year-old in, or we'll bring just because you need someone. And those two up front were a perfect example why we didn't, I think.
I mean, I think, that for me was one of the most interesting points throughout the whole game, is that if you compare Reading's squad to ours, there's a clear plan at Sunderland, there's a clear ethos and a structure as far as the team goes, and the profile of the team and the players that we've got to fit that. And if you compare it to Reading, as you mentioned there, Chris, obviously it just looks like a hit and hope kind of scenario, doesn't it, really? Anybody who was once half decent with a little bit of pedigree, or let's bring them in and hope they can do a job for us. So I don't think the contrast could have been any starker, really. And there is an argument, of course, that Carroll would have, we needed a physical threat up front and all the rest of it, with Connor Wickham, for example. But there's no guarantee, is there? There's no guarantee that you bring someone in there, you run the risk of disrupting everything you've put together, and it could have a detrimental effect. So, it is one of those situations where are you bringing someone in because you genuinely think they can contribute, which is why I think they've obviously brought in a Gelhardt, for example, or are you bringing someone in because there's a bit of a void, you're desperate to fill it, and you need someone who can, just kind of disrupt a little bit? And it's not an easy thing to do. And obviously, Christian Speakman's taken a fair bit of stick about it. But, if you compare the profile of the Reading team to the profile of our team, I think I know which side of the fence I'm on with that one, Chris.
Yeah, and again, like I said, you look at the likes of people signing Andy Carroll, and I don't know how anyone can justify, especially after Christian Speakman came out, and I think he couldn't have explained the situation any better. That he said, they were in a position where it was difficult to bring in that third one.
Yeah,
and then when Ross Stewart got injured, it was difficult to then close up a deal, even though they were still trying right up to the last minute. And and they could have easily went out and got an Andy Carroll.
Of course they could have done,
quite easily,
without a doubt.
The amount of free agents out there, in their 30s, almost retired, want a last payday. We could have had another striker like that. But I tell you what, I'd rather be in the position we're in with our squad than pick up an Andy Carroll or pick up a Wickham or one of those players. And yeah, I just think it's a perfect example of why we didn't go down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. We're obviously looking now at players who could potentially make the step up to the Premier League with Sunderland at some point. We mentioned Dan Ballard, and I see Dan Ballard as being in that category. You mentioned, someone like Jack Clark and Paddy Roberts, and they could have the potential. Do you think Ballard could potentially make that step up with the Premier League as well at some point?
It's interesting with Ballard, because I think he could quite easily. He could quite easily be a Premier League defender. And it was interesting to see him in the two games against Fulham, especially at the Stadium of Light, because I think he had a right battle with the two strikers, and obviously with Mitrovic in the second half. I think any defender is going to enjoy a battle with Mitrovic. But it was interesting seeing him in those games and him step up, and he didn't look out of place at all marking those players, and I think he did a cracking job. The only question mark which I think hangs over Ballard in terms of stepping up to the Premier League is he half a yard, short of pace for the Premier League? And I think that's the only question mark. Otherwise, the way he brings the ball out, the way he does the real kind of defending, the nitty gritty stuff, fantastic at that. Like I said, the only question mark is his pace at the back, and I don't think Championship sides really kind of stretch that.
No, it's not breakneck pace, is it? It's a little bit more. Yeah. I see where you're coming from there.
It's funny actually watching teams this season. It seems to be more the physical stuff. Like the teams have got more of a physical presence up front than a real tricky player who wants to get in behind, and there's no real kind of space in behind to do that. So I don't think he's been tested on that front. So if hopefully at some point he makes a step up with us, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. So let's look ahead then, Chris. Obviously, we've got a trip to Loftus Road, or the Key and Prince Foundation Stadium, as it's now known as, to give it its proper title there, on Tuesday night to play QPR. Their home form is pretty wretched, to put it mildly. They've only drawn 2. They've lost 4 out of the last 6 at home, and they've drawn 2. They've been beaten by Huddersfield, Burnley, Luton, and Millwall, and they've drawn against Sheffield United and Swansea. So a game, again, that's winnable for us. What I wanted to ask you, Chris, is about potential squad rotation. Now, we've had a fairly heavy schedule recently, so do you think Mowbray could use this as an exercise in rotation, given some of his fringe players some much-needed game time? Maybe Ali Hadji, maybe an Abdullah Bar, for example?
Well, for a start, the way you've just summed up QPR, and they haven't won at home since October the 22nd.
Yeah, I think that was Wigan. Yeah.
And I think their last win, overall, I think you might have mentioned it, but it was at December the 17th. So exactly what we were talking about right at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly what we talked about Reading, where you just think, well, we've got to go there and get 3 points. They're a team they're desperate. They're going to be doing anything to get anything out of the game because
Yeah.
their chins will be on the floor. So they'll just be absolutely desperate. And it's exactly the same conversation we were having, that the expectation is when we're playing someone like this, and I think that was it might have been part of that mentality in the first half against Reading, that sometimes we've got players with so much talent and sometimes we play such fantastic football that you wonder if there's an element of almost the players thinking, well, if we just turn up,
it's automatically going to happen for us.
Yeah, we'll score a goal and we'll win the game.
Yeah.
And and like I said, it seemed to me like Tony Mowbray had to kind of kick them back into reality at half time and say that, you've got to actually go out and earn it and get the goal and win the game. It is interesting. It was a good question, that what is he going to do? Because, as I said, for me, there were signs there in the first half that players might be tired. Well, I think mentally. Tony Mowbray and the team obviously will know physically where they're at. Yeah. But if that's the case, do some of these players just need a game out? And I think you mentioned the Adji. I think he looks the business, by the way. I think.
He really impressed me when he came on, actually. Yeah, I think he showed some real, because obviously he's had, basically no game time at all recently. Absolutely. So he's obviously going to take time to settle in, but definitely some quality there without a doubt.
Oh, his first touch, you can just tell his touch. You just think there's a player there.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to getting him, but I can't see him starting at all. I mean, he's going to spend the next month coming on from the bench.
Yeah.
But I certainly see. The potentially Pritchard. I think because his last 2 cameos from the bench. It'll be interesting to see whether Mowbray thinks, yes, he's deserved enough to make the starting 11, or is he actually too valuable, bringing him on from the bench, that actually you might want to miff him off because he's so good coming off. He's been so good coming off the bench, and he's actually made an impact. So, but potentially that's going to be on his mind, to bring Pritchard in, and Dan Neil and Mishu in the middle. Does one of those need a rest? Well, Knight's come on there the last couple of games, so yeah, I think there's signs that a few of them might need a break, but. I'm not entirely sure Mowbray will give it to them, to be honest.
I think the good thing is, though, Chris, and I think we could probably agree on this, is that we've got options now. We've got that depth that we can bring them in. Because I think that was particularly early in the season, before we completed our summer transfer business. I think you looked at the bench, and I think a lot of people's concern was there was a bit of a noticeable drop off in quality when Mowbray turned to his bench. But now, if you look at the players who he's able to call on from the bench, it's really, really good, and we've got some really good options there, haven't we?
It was interesting. If you listen to Mowbray after the game, he was talking about changing things up, moving forward. But one of the things he mentioned was that some of the players he might bring in might not be up to speed or kind of with it in terms of what he wants us to do off the ball.
Yeah.
So, or when we're not in possession and we're set up in those defensive duties, and I think actually part of him thinks. It seemed to me like he thought some of them needed a rest, but he was worried about putting the players in who was on the bench, because they're not completely clued up with where they need to be in certain situations and the positioning side of it. So I think he's worried that we're going to get caught out if he makes too many changes. So I can't see from his comments after the game, I can't see 3 or 4 changes. I'm at 2 maximum. But I think it might only be 1 change if he's going to make any at all. QPR is going to be all about us, as far as I'm concerned, because QPR are in a mess. Their form's awful. They're almost in free fall. I mean, I was looking at the league table earlier on, and kind of they're kind of mid-table, and I'm just looking at the points. They're 10 points above relegation, which is a good cushion, but in the form they're on, they could easily find themselves. I mean, a couple of games' time, they could end up being 3 points off the drop, and then they start looking over their shoulders. So they're going to need to pick up points at some point, just to make sure they don't get dragged into that mess at the bottom. But it's all about us. It's if we turn up with the mentality that we could roll them over, and they do something similar to Reading, where they try and frustrate us, and just behind the ball try and catch us on the break or something like that, then we need to be on it and we need to do our thing. Because if we do that, I don't think there'll be any problem. I think we'll get 3 points.
Yeah, I mean, it could. We know that their stadium's quite tight, quite quite in close confines. And it could be a case, as you said, Chris, of them trying to frustrate us, trying to stifle us like Reading did. I think these players, what they do understand is, or they're certainly starting to understand now that, it's play over 90 minutes. You're not going to be able to, you can't win a game in 45. You've got to work for it. You've got to put the effort in right over the course of the game. It's definitely going to be interesting, and it should be an interesting game, and hopefully a successful trip to London for us on Tuesday night. Thanks very much for joining me tonight, Chris. Always appreciated.
No bother. Always a pleasure, mate.
So we're going to wrap up there, everybody. Thanks for listening. Obviously, rokerreport.sbnation.com for all your pre- and post-match for that. We'll have plenty of that over the coming days, and our next podcast should hopefully be out sometime after the QPR game. So until then, thanks for listening, and cheerio.